Welcome to part 6 of our 6-part series on Your Money, Your Goals for extension educators. And I'm really excited today. We're going to be hearing about some of the other languages available, specifically about Spanish language. Here in Arkansas, we have several communities that have larger populations of Spanish-speaking adults. One of them being the little county that I grew up in, that is probably half of that population now. So our extension educators are always looking for materials that come in both English and Spanish language, so they can have the teaching materials in the language that they need, and also the participant materials and handouts in Spanish language. So we're excited to hear about that today and about some other things that are going on, resources and things from Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. A big shout out to Samantha Barker and Andrea Price, our Zoom technicians who've made this series possible. And much appreciation to our expert presenters from Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Jill Wheeler and Cassie Russell. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And so nice to be back with many of you, or if you're new, welcome. Today, we're really excited, as Laura mentioned, to talk about resources available in Spanish and also for other multilingual communities. And I know that there's been a lot of interest throughout the series in the companion guides. So we're briefly going to touch on those as well before we really dive into Spanish resources. Just a reminder that Jill and I are making this presentation on behalf of the Bureau, and nothing today is legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of the Bureau. Everything we share are our own opinions and might not fully reflect the opinions of the Bureau. And today, if we talk about any third-party links, it's just really important to remember that that's not an endorsement of a product, service, or information by the Bureau, and that there are many resources in the marketplace that you and the consumers you work with can consider. So many of you have already done this, but tell us your name in the chat and where you are, especially if you're new. And by now the slide should look familiar. So just a reminder that the suite of resources includes a toolkit for companion guides and for booklets. And I know that we had a lot of interest throughout the series in the companion guides. So we just wanted to touch on those briefly before we look at Spanish resources. And welcome everybody. Thanks so much for participating in the chat. So we wanted to first look at focus on reentry. We know that this has been popular and we've covered some of the tools throughout this series, but wanted to just highlight where you can find all of the companion guides as well as individual tools available for download. So Focus on Reentry has some tools that are really specific to meet the needs of folks that have been incarcerated or are preparing for a time of incarceration so that they can have a successful transition. So there's a tool on obtaining documents, which we all know is so important to obtaining housing, employment, opening a bank or credit union account, and to really help look at debt prioritization beyond just the typical snowball or high interest method, and think about consequences of criminal justice debt in particular. And then to understand someone's rights about background screenings so that they're able and ready to get employment. Then we have Focus on People with Disabilities. And so this companion guide has 11 tools that really help make sure you can meet the needs of the disability community. So we have tools on setting up ABLE accounts and building savings, paying for assistive technology, understanding how SSI works, including some information on trial work periods, and to identify financial abuse and exploitation. And we did show that tool a little earlier on. So throughout the series, we've mostly included tools from Focus on Reentry and Focus on People with Disabilities, but we also wanted to highlight two other companion guides. The first is focus on military communities, and this has tools with really specific information for programs and information for military families and service members, like special savings opportunities, deciding whether to buy or rent, military relief societies that can help people whether they're active duty or not, and how to financially plan for a change of station, as well as scams that target the military community. So lots of military affinity scams and how to spot and then report those scams. And then last, we have focus on Native communities. So this has tools that includes information on individual Indian money accounts, a different way of talking about financial goals that's more community-based rather than individually focused, and then some information on financial empowerment in elders to really make sure that that experience of elders is being upheld and that they have the information they need to prevent financial exploitation. So those are our companion guides, and we just wanted to mention those tools. Please do go to that link in the chat and explore the tools available for individual download. But now I am going to turn it over to Jill, who's going to start with some general language resources before we look at your money or goals specific resources. So Jill, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cassie. And again, as always, thank you so much to our hosts, Dr. Laura Hendricks and team in Arkansas. We're really happy to be back with everyone today and see a few new names as well that we have. So we're excited to be with you all. Before we jump into the Spanish resources, Cassie, could you go back one slide? And I wanted to pull out and highlight one tool from the Native Communities Guide. Cassie mentioned there's a tool related to annual planning that reflects seasonal income fluctuations and expenses. And I just wanted to flag that that tool can also be especially helpful for people working in agricultural fields, in industries that have cyclical incomes or vary throughout the year. And often this does include the immigrant community or speakers of other languages. So just to flag that seasonal income tool, we try to, encourage everyone to pull from multiple sources to address the needs, and just wanted to flag that. So let's move ahead, and we're really excited today to jump into giving you an overview of the wide range of resources, particularly in Spanish and increasingly available in other languages as well. So one important starting point is the CFPB in Spanish webpage. And Cassie, I think we'll be plugging that in the chat. You see it here, consumerfinance.gov/ES. If some of you had checked that a year or two ago, we encourage you to go back to that webpage now. It's been substantially expanded. So the Bureau's been making an effort to really expand the range of material in Spanish. And that webpage includes a number of the kind of most current articles. So in addition to the Your Money, Your Goals tools that we'll cover, that webpage is where you can find the most up-to-date information on, for example, pandemic-related protections, housing-related protections in Spanish. Often that content comes in more of a blog post or narrative format, so it's not necessarily converted to tools to use with a person individually, but it's a great source of up-to-date content. And again, just to let's see, as we go on to the next slide, we'll just mention, certainly we all know speakers of Spanish or other languages may have substantial barriers for a variety of reasons accessing information on financial services or accessing financial products and services. Often the content is only available in English. And for newcomers, immigrants, refugees, and others, there may be substantial differences in the financial system, in the products available, and really learning a whole new financial and economic system, in addition to overcoming language barriers. So these tools attempt to address some of these barriers and help get that essential content out in multiple languages. I want to highlight this page, which I think has a really helpful range of resources, and we may come back to again later in the presentation to walk through in a little greater detail. But consumerfinance.gov/language is the go-to place to look for resources, tools, and materials that you can share in Spanish and a number of other languages. So here you'll see, Spanish is most widely available on our website, but we also have a substantial number of resources in Chinese, traditional Chinese. We have Tagalog for the Filipino community, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, Russian, Korean, and Arabic. And we're continually working to expand these resources. And I want to also take a moment to highlight, we know that all of you and many of your partners have done great work adapting, customizing, building on content for local communities. And we really encourage people to share those resources. We know so many people are working to, anything we can do to help avoid duplication of efforts or recreating materials. We love to see how you all have adapted or customized translations. If you have a unique community, we know there's been a lot of work with the Marshallese community in Arkansas, for example, and we know a lot of nonprofits and local agencies have created single handouts in a wide variety of languages. So anytime you can share those resources or make them available to others, we're happy to help convey that information. I would love to hear in the chat, have any of you converted any materials to languages beyond the languages mentioned on that initial web page? We would love to hear if there are examples out there. You can let us know in the chat. And we know that as groups do that, they often pull from a variety of sources for translation and try to respond to local needs and may or may not have access to professional translation services. So one great resource we wanted to highlight is the CFPB glossaries of financial terms. So for several years now, we've had a strong Spanish glossary, and these have been expanded to other languages. So, and Cassie will put the anchor link in the chat, you can access the glossaries in Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Tagalog. And that helps to maintain consistency in the terminology that's used, even though there might be local, slang or dialects. But to the extent possible, we're trying to create a central glossary of terms that can be used as people do their own translations and use standard language in the resources that we create. This was done in partnership with a number of other government agencies, including FHFA, FDIC, DOJ, and several others. So let's continue on. And I wanted to dive more specifically into the tools from the Your Money, Your Goals suite of resources that are available in Spanish. And as we do that, I do see a comment in the chat that Veronica has used the toolkit and other resources to make PowerPoints in Swahili. So that's great to hear. Excited to hear that, and would love to hear from other experiences as well. To get into a little more detail on the Your Money, Your Goals Spanish resources, Cassie, if you could go back one slide here. I do want to highlight the full toolkit itself is available in Spanish. The one drawback is the most recent version was updated in 2016. So it's not entirely up to date in some of the links that are in the toolkit, or some of the recent changes related to debt or credit laws. But that can be a great source of some tools, some background language that you can pull from. We're working hard to make some updates, but it's a pretty intensive task to update the full toolkit in other languages. So for now, we've been really focusing on translating the most popular, frequently used individual tools. And we'll go through them in a minute. I'll also mention the Behind on Bills booklet and credit booklets. Both of those are fully available in Spanish. You can order the Spanish print copies. You can also order the Spanish versions to be used in correctional facilities without the buyer binding. So let's continue on, Cassie. And the toolkit again covers the 43 tools and handouts. The most popular we have now available in Spanish. We will continue on and go through those individually. So I'll give an overview and then Cassie will take you through a few of those tools. The tools currently available are listed here, from the basic money management to, spending tracker, cutting expenses, prioritizing bills, and a number of the detailed handouts and kind of checklists related to debt collection, credit, and some of the consumer protection around identity theft and spotting red flags. So we'll continue on. And just as a reminder, the Spanish tools that are included in the bills booklet include work on creating action plans, tracking and managing income and spending, prioritizing bills and expenses. And one note I want to add, for awareness, when the booklets and all of these materials were created, there was a lot of thought and testing and research that went into choosing the illustrations, the visuals, the icons used in those materials for a couple of reasons. And one was to make sure they were appropriate, acceptable, and useful across cultures. So even in selecting the animals that were used on the covers, there was a lot of thought into making sure that the visuals used were culturally sensitive and wouldn't be offensive or wouldn't have negative connotations for different cultures who might be using the booklets. And again, I'll highlight all of the Bureau materials are designed in plain language to be readable at an 8th grade level. And many of the Your Money, Your Goals tools are really designed for accessibility at a 6th grade reading level and use a lot of icons for people with lower levels of education or to help overcome language barriers. So we'll continue on, Cassie. And just again to flag, the credit booklet is available in Spanish and for correctional facilities. Okay, and 11 tools in Spanish. And just before we jump into these detailed tools, I will highlight a little of the language we use on our website and in the tools. Much of the language is based around using newcomers to the US. And we want to recognize that people come with many different types of legal status or documentation or access to different protections, whether they're refugees or asylum seekers, whether they may, in the process, people may file to receive an individual tax ID number. But broadly, we want to recognize that people accessing the materials in other languages may have a variety of unique personal situations where they have more or less protection. We assume many of you are really familiar with that, but just do want to recognize, in using the term newcomers, we try to capture the community most broadly in describing the population these tools are designed for. But many people will have unique legal and needs related to accessing the financial system. So Cassie, would you continue on and take us through a few of the 11 tools in Spanish?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jill. So we're going to look briefly at all of them and dive in a little bit deeper on some of them. If you've been in the prior sessions, some of these will look familiar. And in the chat, I put a link to the landing page where you can download all of the individual tools and handouts. And if it's available in Spanish, there will be a link there. So you can follow along there. Today, because we're using both English and Spanish tools, we're not going to link every tool. It would really be a lot of links, but you can find everything there on that landing page. So earlier in the week, or maybe last week, we talked about the spending tracker, which really helps somebody track their expenses in a non-judgmental way. So we talked about, why is cell phone first, right? And learn that it's all alphabetical so that it's really judgment-free. And so that's a tool that we have available in Spanish that can help people look at their expenses, and then later on, we'll look at some tools that they might use after using the spending tracker. We also have the bill calendar, and this is a really popular tool. Maybe if somebody's more of a visual learner, or they want to get other members in their family involved. Maybe they place this on the refrigerator or somewhere else they can see. And so this helps somebody map out when their bills are due, and they can also add their income and when that happens to come through. And it encourages people to plan ahead based on whether they're paying online or by mail, so that no bills are considered late. Another one we have is cutting expenses. And this one's really popular because we know that oftentimes there isn't enough to really make ends meet. But again, this provides different strategies based on the expense and allows the person to choose things that might work for them. So I might come in and say, oh, get rid of your gym membership, but maybe the gym has free childcare, and that's a place where somebody can take a break, or maybe they buy a Wi-Fi pass or things like that. So it just allows them to come up with different solutions that they think will work for them based on their unique situation. So this is what we want to take a little bit of a deeper look at, and curious to tell us in the chat, what are some of the consequences of not paying bills? What are some of the consequences that people might face? And then if you work with people right now who are having a hard time paying all their bills, what are some of the strategies you use? Yep, so they might get collection calls, repossession, the loss of an item, right? Their credit score might be impacted. They might have a late fee. Yeah, those compounding fees we know can really send somebody into sort of a debt spiral. So this tool helps, a utility shut off, absolutely. Helps somebody read through the list of expenses and identify what they need to pay to protect what's most important to them. So it's organized by things they need for a job, things they need for insurance, things to maintain housing, and really allows them to think through, okay, yes, if I don't pay my utilities, I might get a shut off, but if I don't pay my child care, I won't be able to go to work because they won't allow me to drop my child off. Or if I don't pay for car insurance, I won't be able to get to and from work, or for that bus pass, right? And so it helps somebody think through consequences sort of beyond those immediate consequences that we might think of, and prioritize bills in months where times are tight. This tool is not meant to be used long-term. It's really meant to be used in those emergency situations. And then hopefully somebody can use some of the other tools to move towards more financial stability.
And I would just add here to highlight, Cassie, this is a tool that we have seen as especially important in newcomer communities who might be less familiar with the US system. So helping really to understand the consequences of different actions, whether it's related to a legal obligation, a housing related issue, understanding their rights and protections, and how some bills, again, not necessarily the loudest voice, but really understanding which bills have the most significant impact for their family and their family's well-being. And many of these factors might come into play down the road if a person is, requesting citizenship, or this can be a really important decision that can affect the long-term, not only financial, but broader well-being of the family. So this can be an important tool to help talk through and to really have on hand any sort of state level protections, any recent changes such as protection around medical debt, so people can understand the consequences related to the many different bills they might face.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And somebody also added to the chat reputation, which we know is definitely really important in rural areas where maybe credit is more relational. Especially, I grew up in a rural area. I know at the feed store, you put it on your tab, and so losing access to that would have repercussions for future income, but also certainly reputationally. And somebody else just mentioned that understanding rights and protections is important for newcomers. Yeah, absolutely. So there's also a question just about how things are organized. So you can download the complete toolkit in Spanish, but you can also access the tools individually. So I can switch over and show you the difference real quick before we move on. So this is the Your Money, Your Goals website. And here you can download the Spanish toolkit. It's all of the tools available in Spanish. But if you'd like to access individual tools, you can scroll down and you'll see here, for instance, the spending tracker that we talked about, you can download the tool in English or in Spanish. And the downloadable versions are autofill, auto calculate. So it'll total up as you type in the amounts, or you can print them if you are using paper. So great question.
And there I would just flag that if you are pulling tools from the 2016 full toolkit, many of them will be absolutely useful and accurate. I would just be cautious about any tools related to credit and debt, since there have been a few changes and additional protections recently. So just always take a close look at those issues. Those are the tools that are most frequently updated.
Thanks, Jill. And I will say that in addition to the downloadable tools, the debt and credit booklets are available in Spanish. And so that's a good place. I'm behind on bells. I'm getting them confused. The credit booklet, at least I know for sure, I'm getting my animals confused, is available in Spanish. And so that is a place where you could access some more recently updated information on credit and debt. Okay, and somebody mentioned they ordered them for free, which is great. So just to highlight again, shipping is free. So you could order the booklets for free as well if those are things that you will use in your work. Okay, then we have the debt log, which we also talked about earlier in the week. One thing to highlight here is that they don't mention immigration debt. So sometimes maybe people have worked, especially with a lot of nonprofits, will offer even credit building loans for immigration purposes. So to really encourage somebody to think about all of the types of debt that they might have. And then we see the debt action plan. And again, this is really focused on using the snowball method of playing the smallest step first or starting with interest rate, but people might need to take into account consequences of specific debt beyond interest rate and the amount that they owe. We also have the tool on when debt collectors call. So this helps somebody just feel more empowered in a situation where maybe they were not sure what to say, and helps them know what questions to ask and also what notes to take. And as Jill mentioned, there's been some changes to credit. So we're going to look at this requesting your free credit reports, but we just wanted to mention that through the end of 2022, people can get a free credit report from each of the nationwide credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion on a weekly basis. That is set right now to end December 31st of 2022. But prior, we know it was really important to help people think about whether they were going to request those credit reports on 3 separate dates as a strategy for monitoring their credit, or if they were going to request on a single date, either for ease or because they are preparing for a large purchase. And then I know that sometimes a question we get that unfortunately we don't have a lot of resources about is about pulling credit when somebody has an ITIN, and there is a great FAQ on the annual credit report website on that. So you can look there for that information. And I sorry, the slides are hyperlinked. So I also know that some of your extension colleagues have some great resources on building credit with an ITIN as well. So if somebody chooses to get their credit report and it's safe for them to do so, they can look through and make sure that the information is correct. So earlier we talked about some common errors, making sure identity information, public records, and collection account information, as well as any trade lines and inquiries are listed correctly. I do want to mention that our tool has some outdated information on public records. So we are working on updating that, but bankruptcy is the only public record now that will appear. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill, who's going to talk with us about protecting identity and spotting red flags, which I know for those of you that joined us yesterday, we covered yesterday, but we want to just show the tools that are available in Spanish as well.
Great. Thanks, Cassie. And yesterday we did talk about the importance of both preventive work and then taking action when harm has occurred. So there's a nice handout on protecting your identity. And I want to flag that we do see within the newcomer community, certainly with Spanish speakers, identity theft has been a very significant concern and can create a large number of problems that are, affect a person for an extended period of time and can affect their family's well-being. So any chance that you have to help people understand what they can do to protect their identity by, keeping identification numbers safe and limited, not sharing information, whenever possible, limiting access to personal identification can always help to prevent some of those barriers. I know I have come from a career working with the Spanish speaking community, and we saw that at tax time, that was a time when it could be people were especially vulnerable to being, trying to figure out the right thing to do, the right people to trust for information and who to share information with. So this handout, I think, can be helpful in taking steps to protect your identity, thinking about not only adults, but also children or younger people. The more they're active online, sharing information, there's a range of opportunities for people to gain access to personal identification. So anything we can do to help people protect that can be a really important step. I'll go on to the next slide, which is identifying red flags. And again, like in any community, keeping an eye out for, pressured sales tactics, situations where there's no consistency in the terms of an agreement that's being made. Getting things in writing can be really helpful, but this is a handout that can provide a little extra confidence and sort of a checklist if a person is going to purchase an auto or negotiate on a substantial purchase, and just helping them be confident in, being cautious, being sensitive to things that might seem not quite right, and taking the time to wait and make a decision that is in their best interest in the long term. And now I will hand it back over to Cassie to talk a little more about some of the tools and content in the Spanish booklets.
Great. Thanks so much, Jill. I also just want to note that spotting red flags can be helpful in identifying cultural differences in purchases and providing context about pricing in the US in particular, that sometimes is surprising to newcomers. The concept of a sticker price versus negotiating things can be a little bit different, and maybe some of those lack of consistency or pressured sales tactics might seem different in a different cultural context. So now I'm excited to talk about two of the booklets that we have available in Spanish. And I said the wrong thing earlier. It's the credit and Behind on Bills booklet that are available. So I apologize, I said debt earlier. But first we want to look at want credit to work for you. So this is more recent. So if you are looking for more up-to-date information than what's in the full toolkit, you can order that. And again, you can get these mailed to you for free. They do come wire bound, but there is a special ordering system if you work in a correctional facility or mental health facility where they don't allow wire binding. You can get them without the binding as well. So in Want Credit to Work for You, there are 8 tools, and they're color coded to help somebody know where they might want to start. So the yellow tools really help somebody get started by requesting and reviewing their report. The blue-green tools help somebody plan and take action steps. And the red tools are for immediate challenges and needs. So that color coding can help people orient to the different tools, but we have one on getting your credit report, checking for errors, correcting errors, making an action plan, building credit scores, deciding whether or not to use credit, identity theft and fraud, and resource cards. So we want to just look at what one of the tools looks like. This is the action plan, and it helps somebody really identify steps to build credit, which we know is often a common question for newcomers. And so we start with one question about how a positive credit history can help somebody achieve their goals. So really thinking long-term about something that might be exciting to somebody, like getting a car, going to school, obtaining housing, etc. So we want them to think about their goal first, and then there are some steps to build good credit. Getting their credit report if it's safe to do so, researching credit building options, establishing good habits like utilization rate, keeping that low, a good mix of credit, and making on-time payments. And then we see that there's a section for resources as well as a date to complete each step. And I know for those of you who've been with us, we looked at this tool before, but just wanted to highlight how you might want to use it in the Spanish booklet. We also have Behind on Bills in Spanish, and same thing here. There's always 8 tools in all of the booklets. So here, the blue-green tools can help somebody get a better picture of their finances, what's coming in, what's going out. Yellow is really about goals and setting new goals. So how can somebody bring in more income or cut expenses? And then red again is for those immediate challenges and needs. So we have tools on tracking income, spending tracking, the bill calendar, which we looked at earlier, but in a different version in the booklet, goal setting, and then ideas for bringing in extra money in their situation, as well as cutting expenses, prioritizing bills, which we looked at earlier, dealing with debt collectors, which we also mentioned, and then the resource cards, which we've covered earlier in the week. But we want to take a look at these again because we also think, that Extension has a unique role in really helping the people that you work with, the consumers that you work with, find and access trusted resources in your community. So this helps somebody keep track of resources and referrals by starting with a question about, is there anything else you're concerned about? And then on the inside, we see information for federal resources. So just want to mention here that not everyone will have access to federal resources. So you can make your own version of this or cover that information if it's not relevant or cross it out depending on state and federal rules for different programs. But at the top, we see some blank lines where people can fill in resources. So you could provide that information. We've seen some people get really creative and have people fill this in a group setting and then share everyone's ideas, since people might have knowledge about how to access a certain resource. So as Jill just mentioned, we'd love to hear from you in the chat about if you've used the booklets in Spanish, if you have any experiences, good or bad, or any tips or ideas about how you've used the booklets. And while you think about sharing that, Jill is going to talk with us about some more bureau-wide resources that are available in Spanish.
Thanks again, Cassie. And next, we wanted to highlight the financial well-being resources. We know some of you have used the financial well-being scale, which has a lot of research, a lot of testing and research went into developing the main financial well-being scale. And it is also available in Spanish. So the survey content can be done in Spanish. There's some background in Spanish. And again, this is just to look at a person's general financial well-being at a point in time. So give a sense, a quick scale and survey to get a sense of where a person stands in terms of overall financial well-being, which we talk about means, ability to handle financial issues in the short term and build well-being for the long term. So these can be used over a period of time to track changes in an individual's financial well-being. For some of you, this can be helpful in reporting outcomes and measuring program impact. And again, the whole guide, scale, and scoring materials are all available in Spanish. And of course, we always love to hear any experiences or insights for anyone who's been using the financial well-being scale in English or Spanish. So let's continue on to another, next slide, please, Cassie. We'll come back to that same link, just highlighting again in a slightly different context, the practitioner resources for multilingual communities and newcomers. And that page, I wonder, Cassie, would you be able to open up that page and we can kind of give a quick walkthrough? So this covers a wide range of immediate, specific transactions and longer term resources. And one point I wanted to note is that we often see financial decisions are made in multi-generational families. So there may be a mix of both immigration status and language comfort in a family. So sometimes we'll see younger family members accessing the resources in English, but they find it very helpful to have the Spanish versions available for their parents or grandparents to help, talk through decisions or discuss financial issues. And there are some resources related to older Americans and vulnerable people that may be useful in this context as well. So on the multilingual page, we have a highlighted box related to sending money abroad, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Sending remittances to countries and communities of origin. It's really important for people to know their rights. We'll come back to that in a moment. And if you could just scroll down, other resources, the pandemic related resources are available in a number of languages. Again, here, English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese, Tagalog, Creole, and Arabic. And other blogs are available in multiple languages. And then some of the children's and older Americans activities are also available in Spanish. So just to highlight, you might want to explore that page on your own. And if you do, if you could keep on scrolling down just a bit, Cassie. There are a number of technical disclosure related documents. So related to housing issues, some of the financial disclosures that financial service providers are required to provide are now available in Spanish. And so you can explore this website on your own. And there is a subscription box over on the upper right-hand side if you're interested in joining the language multilingual communities mailing list. So there's a lot of overlap. We often share resources, but you can sign up for specific updates on language access issues. So we could go back to the slide deck now, Cassie. We'll talk a little bit about some of the practitioner guides, and some of these have been available for several years now. Basic newcomers guides to managing money. And this is a series of handouts available in Spanish, and then I believe in some other languages now as well. But understanding ways to receive your money. One is a really important checklist for opening a bank account with a bank or a credit union, walking through the steps, clarifying what documentation is or is not needed, so people really understand their rights and what financial institutions may be offering to them. I imagine there's certainly a lot of variation. One point I want to highlight when we talk about the newcomer community or the Spanish-speaking community is just recognizing the great diversity within that community, both ethnically, racially, in communities of origin, in legal status. And so really understanding the unique situation of a person or a community you're serving. If people are coming from certain countries like Mexico, they may have certain additional options or protections, whether it's at tax time or related to sending money. Others, depending on their status as a refugee or asylum seeker, have protections. Some countries like Mexico may offer a special identification card, a matricula consular, that helps people more easily access bank services and is recognized well by banks in many areas. But in some areas, the local bank or financial institution just may not recognize it or may not be aware. So that's an area where you all and we all can help people understand the options and make sure they're able to access and exercise their rights and protections. There's another handout on ways to pay your bills. And we know that the options for paying bills and exchanging money are expanding really quickly with different apps and new fintech services that are available. But this covers some of the basics. And then selecting financial products and services is a really important handout as well, as people make those decisions and find the product that is most in line with meeting their needs. Let's continue on to the next slide on remittance transfers. And there are a few links that we've highlighted, and a section here I want to highlight on sending money to another country. There's a very specific set of protections, and we want people to be sure they understand their rights in terms of having access to the information about, what is the exchange rate that will be used in this transaction, have the provider clearly stating the fees involved, the timing of when the funds will be available on the recipient end. And so that can be a really important resource for people to understand the rights and options. And I would mention that we often see that, in choosing a financial service provider, people may have different values and different priorities in how they select the provider or service that's best for them. So just a reminder that we certainly see in cases of sending remittances or choosing financial services, the comfort level in accessing that institution can be very important to a person, the hours that they're available, the ease of transportation or access. So as we're sharing and as you're sharing information with a person, recognizing that they may be coming with many different priorities and factors that go into their decision. It may not always just be, the cheapest financial cost at the time. It could be a wide variety of factors, but this really helps to highlight what are a person's rights and knowing the details of the transaction. And again, I just want to take a moment to recognize that newcomers, in a variety of situations may not always feel comfortable or confident asserting their rights. There may be fear They may not know who to trust. And so we encourage you to keep an eye out for trends you're seeing in your community. You know, if you see trends that you want to share, you can let us know. People can always file a complaint through the formal process. And just to keep in mind, you know, the factors that a person may be weighing when they choose to file a complaint or not. We certainly recognize there are complex situations there as people choose to exercise their rights. And if we could continue on, just to highlight a couple additional resources in a very different format. We do have a set of audio resources that can be downloaded. The MP3 files are available in Spanish and English, and some other languages on some of the most popular content around understanding credit scores, building credit, some topics related to debt and debt collection, and then shopping for an auto loan can be a nice audio overview. Can we go on to the next slide, Cassie? Again, the Knowing Your Rights resources are available in 9 languages here on the website, and we'll post these again in the chat. But those are really important, related to credit discrimination and understanding protection under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And next slide, please. All right, Cassie, I will turn it back over to you as we start to close out today's session and the series. I want to make sure to encourage people to put questions in the chat. I know we're not seeing any questions coming in. If you prefer to unmute, if you want to flag, we could take some questions over audio if that's helpful, but would love to hear any questions in the chat. And as we wrap up, I will cover this one and then turn back to you, Cassie. We do want to highlight again the Ask CFPB function, which is a great resource available both English and Spanish, but it's a really easy way to type in basic financial questions, put in a topic, put in a question, and you can search and browse and find a lot of great information. It'll link you to a variety of resources that can address your questions on those topics. So that is available in Spanish.
Thanks so much, Jill. And that's something that you can use with the people you work with, or a link you can give them if they're searching for answers on their own. All the answers are in Spanish, and they link to some of the tools that are available in Spanish as well. So as Jill mentioned, we'd love to see your questions in the chat, or we know so many of you are expert implementers in your community. So we'd love to hear about how you are using the resources. So one good question that I see here is, are the booklets in English and Spanish sequenced together? Could you use them in a mixed group? And you definitely can. We have had a couple of different partners who've done this, either with translation or by splitting the room, or a multilingual person facilitating first in one language and then in another. But the order is the same for the booklets, regardless of the language. So I have here Behind on Bills in Spanish, and it is the exact same as the English version. So you could definitely do that. For the individual tools, you would need to download them. If you ever want assistance in making, PDFs or anything like that, you can feel free to reach out, and we'd be happy to work with you to create a bundle to meet your needs. We also wanted to highlight the print publications. We've talked a lot about Pueblo and how you can order for free, but just wanted to highlight that in addition to searching by the group of materials, so by clicking on your money, your goals, you can also just filter by what's available in the language that you need, whether that's Spanish or another language. And so you can look for posters, bookmarks, and other handouts that might be helpful in your community. So hopefully you've been with us since the beginning. And if you have, we'd love to invite you to do our post-training survey. We know that you all look carefully at data, and this just helps us make sure we're reaching our goals. If you don't have time to do it now, that's really fine. You can do it in the future, but we'd love to get feedback from you. I dropped that link in the chat, or you can use the QR code if you have a mobile phone. And then we also wanted to plug our email sign up one more time, which I will also put in the chat. And that is the best way to learn about upcoming training events. We have a public training series that happens about quarterly, as well as releases of new materials. And as Jill mentioned, the Bureau has a renewed commitment to language access. And so that would be the best place to learn about new releases. So I also just wanted to mention our email one more time. So yourmoneyyourgoals@cfpb.gov. So in addition to the email sign up, you're welcome to reach out to our team mailbox, and someone will work hard to get back with you about your needs. So we'd love to hear any other questions before we wrap up, any other suggestions you have for others who are implementing these materials in their communities. And Jill also just added her email, so thank you, Jill.
And just a reminder that the Bureau complaints line can take phone calls in 180 languages. So that phone number is in the chat. It's 855-411-2372. And I'm glad to see some comments coming in. Some ready to train extension workers in Puerto Rico. Thank you, Irma Martinez.
And I saw a question about, do you want me to take the survey if I haven't participated in all the sessions? We will have those recordings available soon. And so if you want to watch whatever recording you missed before you take the survey, you are welcome to do that. And happy to have brought you this webinar series, or this training series from the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Financial Security for All Community of Practice through Extension nationally. Any other questions or comments for Jill or Cassie while we have them here?
And I would like to take a quick moment to first thank all of the participants who have been engaging through the series, your comments and experiences in the chat. And many of you have shared some really fascinating materials that you have developed. So we've really enjoyed seeing those and appreciate all the work you do. We would be glad to hear suggestions, as we've mentioned along the way, and really appreciate all of the collaboration over many years from many of you on the extension teams across the country who have contributed to developing these tools, testing and using and sharing insight on these tools, and especially to the team in Arkansas, Dr. Laura Hendricks, Andrea Price, Samantha Baker for this series. I also want to recognize Suzanne Bartholome, who's been really involved as a collaborator throughout. And a special thanks to Cassie Russell, who really took the lead on putting this series together, training, facilitating. Cassie, we really appreciate all of your ongoing work. And again, I will turn it back to Dr. Laura Hendricks. Thank you so much, Laura. It's been great to collaborate with you. We appreciate your leadership in this topic. And thanks so much for collaborating on this series.
Thank you, Jill. We're really excited to learn more about using these materials and look forward to, for everyone who's attended these, we look forward to having you at future Financial Security for All community meetings and our monthly webinar series. Thanks, everyone.